any hot takes that you want to kind of put out there for maybe 5 years down the road of how it's going to evolve?
I think that 5 years down the road, we will see for sure a lot of these agents interacting and having this interoperation in the world. And we will be talking about how they affect the physical world and how they affect the digital world and even organizations. So you will have hybrid workforces that you will need to manage, composed by humans and agents performing some jobs. You will go to the physical world and you will see autonomous vehicles of different types. It's not only cars. I believe that we will see a lot more smaller robots.
Good morning, Agus. Good to see you always. I want to let you know that I had a couple extra cups of coffee this morning just in preparation for this. So I've got a lot of energy. I hope you're going to bring the energy as well. But super excited as always to chat with you. And today we're going to be chatting about AI and innovation, quantum robotics, and anything else you want to kind of throw into the game. So from there, let's go ahead and kind of jump into it if you're okay. So August, obviously you've been with Globant for
Sure.
a long time, and you've been working in technology for probably more than 2 decades. And in those 20 years, obviously you've seen a lot of different, transitions and new technologies, and you've seen AI kind of go from this idea all the way to now it's a fully global, scalable type of, let's say even ecosystem and technology. But like, what have you learned about like balancing between delivery with experimentation and innovation at scale? Like, what have you seen around that?
Well, let me open by saying that hearing you say that I have 2 decades of experience on this is hard. But outside of the show, well, there is a rule that Eric Schmidt, one of Google founders, mentioned at some point in time, that he said that you have to have a splitting time that is like 70, 20, 10, where 70% of your time is dedicated to actually doing delivery that impacts the core of your business or is part of the core of your business if you're a technology company. 20% of the time should be dedicated to those innovations that are closer to transforming your business and that can be turned into real changes right now. And 10%, you can say it's for having fun, not sleeping, or trying cool new stuff. Yes. So if you look into, for example, the case of AI, for many organizations, 70% of their core business is running enterprise solutions, SAP, Salesforce. Then you have a 20% of that you should be combining with delivering with the AI features that those platforms, for example, incorporate right now, or even starting to leverage some of the AI models that you can get from providers like OpenAI, for example. Yes, but then you need to have that 10% that sometimes it's even harder to measure. Yes, when you look into AI right now, you will see that there are many reports saying, well, which is the success rate those projects have, and sometimes it's like, whoa, a bit harsh to hear that only 5% of the projects go into actual production. Yes. But that's right now part of that 20% that is like innovation being applied to your business that potentially in the future will turn into being part of that 70% that you are incorporating. Now, that 10% that is a lot more difficult to measure because the KPIs sometimes is more like, well, which is the level of readiness this is going to allow me to have in the future. It's maybe the most sacred one because it's the one that will really get you prepared for when that technology is ready to be embraced and be turned into that 20% and then transform into the 70%. Have the level of readiness, maturity, and so on in processes, upskilling of the people, how the organization thinks around that technology. Maybe if you look back in time, 7 years back when I was starting to get more involved into the AI world, well, AI was part of that 10% in many cases. And if many organizations would have, be mindful of that 10% and not just get greed because sometimes experiments do not work as expected, yes, they would have a higher level of readiness for the upcoming challenges or the benefits that they could leverage from the current evolve in technology. So that 10% is the hardest to keep safe in an organization, I would say. It could be easily seen as, cost and money that is going nowhere, instead of thinking in the long term how that's preparing me for the future.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the 10%. Obviously, you see many companies today using the upskilling, as you mentioned, within the AI scope. It doesn't matter. It's not the traditional AI engineers anymore that are upskilling toward, AI different certifications. You have that on the consulting front through delivery and all the way into sales as well. And I think you're going to continue to see that. And so kind of like taking a look at all the different types of technology shifts that's happened. We mentioned a few like IoT to quantum and now with generative AI. Like you've kind of been in a lot of these, real technology shifts over the last, like I said, 20 years or so. So like kind of looking back on your experience, like what patterns do you see in organizations that how they can adapt and like where they often stumble into when it comes to adapting to these new technologies?
I think that something that is very common is for organizations, if you are implementing a new technology, it has to have an immediate impact in the business. Yes. And even many times the expectations are that those impacts can be quantified in at least a two-digit kind of improvement. Yes. And for technologies, when they are developing early, that's hard. That's hard because the technology is evolving, the ecosystem around that technology is also evolving. Look into Gen AI, for example. I'm happy, I would say, every day that I receive a newsletter that says not much happened today, because that implies that I can catch up with everything that has been happening on the past 6 or 7 days that I have not had the chance, because the whole ecosystem is evolving. New models are announced, new features within AI applications. Everyone is trying to have an impact in their frameworks. Similar thing happened with IoT. If you look into IoT, like, I don't know, 10 years back, everyone was just thinking about wearables. And so for organizations, it was like, okay, which is the wearable I need to build? And that was not the question, yes? Because a wearable implies mass consumption, implies a lot of volume, and you may not have that volume for making it cost efficient, yes? But maybe it was about, hey, how can I implement part of this technology inside my store, my branch, my warehouse to improve the operations. Yes. In some cases, some of those technologies are closer in terms of the applications or the use case are well known, or how the hardware or software is ready for those use cases. Sometimes it's bigger, the jump. And so you see that there are industries that are adopting those things faster. If you look into quantum, for example, of course, it's a great disruptive technology that in the current state, of course, it cannot maybe impact all the business use cases that potentially it could. Yes. If you look into finance, for example, yes, it could help run AI models a lot better and faster for fraud detection, analyzing a lot more variables in a single second. Yes. Well, the technology is not there right now. So although it's a feasible use case, it's not the time to invest money into trying that. But if you are, for example, and let me jump to another industry because it's easier to represent, yes, to a pharma company, for example. When you are doing research and development of a new drug, you need to try maybe tens of thousands of different variations to finally find that combination of the chemistry that works as you are expecting. Well, you can have a quantum computer, no matter the size or capability right now, everything will be faster and more capable than what you may have with current hardware solutions. And you can try a lot more variations overnight. Yes. And when you get back, you see the outcomes and say, hey, okay, these top 10, I will try them out. Yes, I will write more real life experiments to see if the findings are correct. Yes. Why? Because now with quantum computing, it's more like kind of offline async kind of processing. That's a real, very good use case. And it's a use case that in the pharma industry, for example, I believe it should be moving from that 10% that we were discussing to that 20%. Now, if you ask me for finance, Well, for many of their use cases in which you need real-time or real-life decision, well, maybe it's still on the 10%. But once that technology is enabled, you will be faster in order to jump to the 20% allocation of time to that, and then to the 70% and turn it into the core business. Yes. So a common pattern that I see is looking into what the technology is capable right now and not clearly understanding the evolution that it may have, yes, and how still investing today can help me be more ready for that evolution that will come later on. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I
Devices
think
become
it's a really good.
cheaper.
Sure. I mean, it's a good point to say, like, be realistic of where the technology sits today. What's the real application? What's the real value today? But then how can it also potentially scale for the future? I think that's a balance. Kind of touching on that same topic, you mentioned kind of in the middle of that about like kind of real enterprise value and showing ROI initially. Just kind of when you start thinking about these technologies, like how would an organization kind of go on about trying to solve for how can we find, let's say a quick turn, right? Like low hanging fruit value when it comes to technologies. Like what are some like applications that might be very easy frameworks for organizations to say, hey, we want to be able to implement this technology and find a really quick win? Like what are some different things that you've seen within your clients or companies that have used this and seen some quick ROI?
One of the things that I believe you need to understand when you are looking for that low-hanging fruit is that if you look, for example, into reports about what's failing with Gen AI right now, many will say and will focus a lot in terms of adoption. And for us, adoption has been a key. I mean, if you look into our past tech trends reports, for example, you will see that we have been talking a lot about making AI more human, connected, closer to the user, how the experience for the user needs to be tackled. Yes. So in many cases, it's like, okay, how I innovate without creating a bit disruption in terms of how my employees work. So for example, almost 8 years back, we did a development for a large retailer in which we were optimizing their packaging and logistics process. Yes. The team at the distribution center was actually working every single day with an Excel file that they open in the morning that says exactly what they need to do. It came from wherever, they don't care. It's just how they operate. So when we optimized and created those AI models, we could have, say, for example, well, let's create I don't know, a web application or a mobile application. So now the guy at the logistics center will need to start interacting with it, looking into what the new packaging optimizations are and so on. But that would have disrupted him in a more significant way and would have had an impact in terms of the adoption, how fast they could read the message. Yes, even if I make the packages more efficient, I will be able to deliver them on time. Yes, people will need time. How do I train the people in all the different countries in which those distribution centers operate? Now, maybe it may seem or look a bit less natural in terms of how you think about innovation. But actually, the innovation was creating the model. How we made that information available could be whatever. So we ended up connecting that to the Excel file, and that people didn't feel any changes. So basically, the adoption barrier was 0. For them, they keep on operating on the same basis. So when you look into those low-hanging fruits, it's not about also that the use case can be solved with the technology with maybe a lower effort, but also how you lower all the other things that are needed in order to make that go into production and be successful. That's one of the most important things.
So I was kind of changing gears a little bit and thinking about AI agents, right, and autonomous systems. And obviously it's very much now, a core part of the business world and kind of how we operate. So whether it's coding or just thinking about robotics, like what are some of the most practical uses that you're seeing for AI agents today? And like, what are some breakthroughs that maybe still need to happen in order for AI agents and autonomous systems to keep continuing to innovate and be a huge disruptor?
Well, something that for me, it's funny around the world of AI is that, well, now everyone is talking about agents, but we've been talking about autonomous vehicles for a longer time, and they were agents, but it's like no one knew the concept, no one was applying it, and now the challenge that I see when these kind of things happen is that the term gets like nailed into a very specific assumption of that. It's like now everyone thinks about agents, and we're talking about software agents that operate based on an LLM, and the concept is a lot bigger. Yes. So it's impacting different places. I mean, our capability of creating agents have improved. Now we have these software agents that are evolving really fast. The major breakthroughs right now are more related to how do we make them interoperate between each other, and what we have been seeing in this year is the rise of different protocols that try to standardize that. So you have MCP, you have A2A. Now, if you look into these last days news, for example, what you will see is that OpenAI, alongside Stripe and Etsy and some other players on the commerce ecosystem, they have released this concept of the ACP protocol for interactions related to commerce. And there is another one that is being also proposed by some other partners, like A2P. Yes. So the major challenge right now is that I believe those things are great, are making agents more capable to interact into each other, and that's where the real transformation will come from. Otherwise, you just end up chaining them in a way that will not really evolve. And the vision of the future, for example, maybe that you or me will have a personal agent that will be able to go and buy my stuff by interacting with these other agents on somewhere else. And if you look into organizations, you will have a hybrid workforce in which they will be interacting too. Now, the challenge is this uprising of many different protocols that reminds me a bit of something that happened when social media started to rise. Yes, there was a concept that was, I think the name was like open social. Yes, and the idea was to create a single protocol so that every social network could operate and interact into each other. That was never fruitful because everyone was pushing in their own directions and how they wanted to evolve their products and so on. Here, I don't see that much friction, but I still, if you look into this concept of ACP and A2P, and I'm a provider of solutions for commerce, like, I don't know, Salesforce Commerce or Adobe Commerce, which are some of our partners, they find themselves into, okay, should I support one protocol? Should I support both of them? Yes. If I'm a company that has a custom-built commerce solution, yes, that doesn't leverage any of the bigs, where or which do I choose for integration? Because in the future, that will also impact potentially the sales channels that you will have. If you apply ACP, you have ChatGPT. If you apply A2P, I don't know which are the ones that are going to be adopting them in the future. Yes. So the challenge with agents right now is this ecosystem. I hope it does not get more complicated than actually needed. Yes, so that interoperation could evolve. Now, if you look into like physical agents, yes, more like robots, autonomous vehicles, and so on, I believe they are evolving really fast, and we are going to be seeing a lot more adoption and deployments of those kind of solutions. The computing power is also shrinking, so you can have a lot more computing power satisfying a vehicle or a robot, and that could help into doing a more complex task. Again, the problem is about interoperability. If you think about autonomous cars, it could be great that if you have in the future several autonomous cars from different brands operating on the street, they do not rely solely on AI systems like computer vision for driving, but also that they can communicate with some kind of protocol. So you don't rely just on their vision capabilities to take a decision, but proximity, for example, is something they could be communicating to each other. Yes, better. So, and if you look into robots, well, we have this partner in orbit that actually help you manage a fleet of robots where you have many different providers, many different protocols, different capabilities from the robots. How you make them operate on a closed space like a warehouse without colliding to each other. Yes, and also without going into deadlocks. Yes, like no robot is making a decision of who goes first. Yes, you need to prioritize. Well, these kind of things are related to interoperation, also affect the physical world robots that you see nowadays.
Yeah, actually, and so you kind of started like even thinking into the future, like you mentioned, like autonomous vehicles and things. Just out of curiosity, you might hate me for asking this question, but do you have any bold predictions that, let's say in 5 years, in 2030, you talked about autonomous vehicles and robotics, like what percentage of the world will be leveraging autonomous vehicles? Like what type of other bold predictions do you have for businesses when it comes to these technologies? Any hot takes that you want to kind of put out there for maybe 5 years down the road of how it's going to evolve?
I think that 5 years down the road, we will see for sure a lot of these agents interacting and having this uh, interoperation in the world. And we will be talking about how they affect the physical world and how they affect the digital world and even organizations. Yeah, so you will have hybrid workforces that you will need to manage, composed by humans and agents performing some jobs. Uh, you will go to the physical world and you will see autonomous vehicles of different types. It's not only cars. I believe that we will see a lot more smaller robots. Now I moved to Jersey City, and here you have a lot of small IV robots that are delivering food, for example. Well, they will need to interact with the cars that are also on the street, potentially drones. I believe there is an untapped potential in there also. Maybe not for big cities, but more for rural areas, or suburbs where you have a lot more space, a lot of less things that could, disturb their behavior and work and operation. So I believe that's it, and we will also interact with that physical and digital world on a different way. Yes, I believe. Unfortunately, sometimes innovation has these false negatives. Yes, and I believe that concepts like the Humane AI pin or the Rabbit R1 devices that were launched last year face that. They were just the technology was not just there to fulfill all the potential and promises that those devices had. Yes, so they're perceived as, well, they were coming to disrupt us and change, and we're not going to be using smartphones any longer. And we were not there technologically on the fundamentals to satisfy that. But in the future, I believe so. Yes, you already see some signs around that. I mean, this concept of ChatGPT trying to turn itself into like a kind of a super app that can help you on buying stuff. Well, the next step is that it's really becoming an assistant and can help you with doing grocery, with buying a gift for your wife, your kids, whomever. Um, so that's my prediction for the upcoming 5 years. And in terms of most disruptive technologies like quantum computing, I believe that we will see a lot more production-ready use cases being deployed too. Yes, the technology keeps on evolving. There are new advances also in simulated environments, I would say, not pure quantum computing, but that helps with that readiness for what's coming next.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think you said it right, where it's going to be more blended into society with all these different robotics and different digital interactions. Where I think today, if you see a robot, at a store, like cleaning up down the aisles, you're like, oh, wow, look at that cool robot. Or if you go drive down the
Yeah.
highway and you see someone not driving a car, like, oh my gosh, no one's driving that car. Where now it becomes like kind of this surprise where, like, as you said, in 5 years, it still won't be the predominant, right? That's not going to be 90% of
No, for
the
sure.
engagements, but it won't be like, it'll be almost expected, right? It's kind of just blended in kind of an assistant or kind of an augmented part of the world of kind of how it's being able to run. Here's kind of a fun question for you. So, you worked with many different executives at different companies. So if you had to build, let's say, like a short innovation playbook for like a CEO or for executive, how would you help, that organization or executive CEO kind of future-proof their organization when it came to technology? Like, what are some different, let's say, frameworks you would put in place or different guardrails you would kind of set out for them?
So first, I believe that when you are an organization that is not used to innovation, the first thing is to appoint someone that will be in charge of that, yes, with concrete objectives. And one of those objectives should be being the guardian of that 70-20-10 rule. Yes, that individual should fight for that 10% on a daily basis. Yes. Why I'm saying when innovation is not widespread, because I know many organizations tend to say, well, everyone, I'm giving them tools so that everyone feels ready to innovate. Yes. But really, in the end, you may end up having people that does not know how to manage that 70-20-10 and gets distracted with either going too much innovation, distracted going too much into the delivery of the core, and no one is really the owner of making that happen. So if no one is really the owner, no one could be measured against the results. No one can actually bring that disruption into the thinking process of everyday business. Yes, and also someone should be like, again, fighting a bit for the budget for innovation. Yes, and making sure that it's spent in the right way. So I believe that having present that rule, having someone that is truly appointed into the role with concrete goals and capacity to operate, yes, on that context is a must for any organization that truly wants to embrace innovation. Yes, that doesn't mean that the whole team for innovation should be living within the organization. I mean, you can partner with a company like us, for example, to help you on that. Yes, but someone needs to be like the stakeholder on the other end that it's fighting and looking for that, making it happen. Yes, even if it needs to knock on new doors inside the organization, you need that individual that is empowered to do so.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think CEOs are tasked, with a bigger challenge than ever, because, as you mentioned, 5, 10 years ago, it was kind of more of a technology word that was kind of being leveraged and kind of figured out from in the engineering space. But now a CEO mentions Gen AI on an earnings call just to get a 3% bump in
Yes.
stock price, right? And so I think now they understand when that happens, you understand that it's a very seismic shift on kind of how organizations need to take it, seriously and how they're investing in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, I think there's a very detailed process on how to do that and making sure they're taking the right steps to do that. So August, I wanted to kind of end this with a very kind of fun exercise. So I'm going to ask you to get like an iPad or a whiteboard or something like that, and I want you to kind of write one word or even a symbol of kind of what represents the future of organizations when it comes to AI, like the future of AI and the future of organizations around AI. So if you have like one word or one symbol, if you can write that down and kind of show us and then maybe explain why you chose that word or symbol.
Okay. Well, I need to think
Give you a little
about
bit of time. Yeah, give you a little bit of time.
that. um, so I'm not very good at drawing. I think my skills for drawing have been like the same for the past 35 years. So I'm comparable to my 5-year-old kid. So I think that something that is very important in the concept of AI, and I draw some glasses.
Okay.
Yes. Why I draw some glasses in here?
Harry Potter
Uh,
glasses too. They're just magical glasses, right?
well, I don't know if they look like Harry Potter, but this is because it's the best I can do. Yes, maybe if I have better skills, I can do something else. But why I'm putting some glasses in here. First of all, when you look into which is one of the most important senses that humans valued is our view, our vision. Yes. Our vision allows us to see what's right in front of us, but also what's coming next. So if you look into how you need to think about innovation, and again, this concept that we were been discussing is like, I need to see what's right now in there for me and what I can do with what is in there, but also this long-term view of what's coming next. This is like more like the kind of philosophical point of view around the concept of the glasses. Now, there is another one that is more downsized to earth. If you look into the adoption of technology, you will see that some of the most successful technologies have been related to how we perceive the world in some way. It's like the creation of the television, of the movies, look into video games, look into VR. And now, a couple of years from now, and again, although they may come from a false negative that we have in the past, this concept of bringing information into your eyes through some kind of a smart glasses is becoming more and more important. So I believe that some of the things that were hard for these devices that I mentioned before that have failed was the fact that you need to interact with them at some point in time, not only with the voice, but also with something that has a kind of visual aid. So in the case of the Human AI Pin, it has its cameras, but also one of the weirdest things was this idea of projecting you some controls over your hand so that you can interact with it. Vision is also what's powering a lot of what's going on with robotics right now. Yes, if you think about autonomous vehicles, one of the primary directives that Tesla have around autonomous vehicles is that they are right now fully computer vision based and they have removed other types of sensors. If you look into the fields of autonomous vehicles, it has turned into being the rule. And when you look into the solutions like what NVIDIA has with this concept of this virtual environment in which you can train robots, yes, one of the things that you can simulate is all the movements they need to do in different situations to move around objects, to grab an object. And vision is also something that is, in many cases, being improved in those devices to replace other senses. Like a robot hand doesn't have tactile. So it cannot know if it's grabbing a glass that is made of glass or if it's made of plastic. And so the pressure that it needs to apply and everything depends heavily on right now identifying the object properly, the characteristics of that object, and which is maybe the material of what it's done in order to do the operation. So vision is important for organizations to understand what they need to start doing now, but also think about the future. And vision is also important for how we're going to be interacting with the digital world and how the digital world will get embedded into the physical world for us.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect symbol. And, to take your analogy even further, you have kind of the nearsighted focus and the far side, as you mentioned, as far as like the short term and the long term. And I think that carries through because there's so many things now that you have to be really super hyper focused on what's the now problem and solve that while still also kind of thinking forward on the far sided component of vision. So I love the symbol. I think it's great. And again, magical powers of Harry Potter always is going to be too. So, but I think your 5-year-old will be proud of your drawing. You can show him when he gets home. Well,
Thank you.
Agus, I always enjoy chatting. Obviously, you're a good friend, and obviously you have immense amount of respect for all that you do in the space, and really appreciate the time you taken to spend with me to talk about all the fun things around that's happening in Gen AI and quantum and robotics and IoT, et cetera. And again, we need to buckle up because it's going to be a fun ride over the next few years. So again, I really appreciate it, and hopefully this next time we can do this in person.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Pete. It was great always talking to you.
Thanks, Agus.
Bye.